All right, a quick story on how this whole thing came about. As you know, I've been studying the scriptures. I come across this passage in Numbers 13, and I noticed that before Moses invaded Canaan, that he had 7 questions he wanted his boys to get answers for. There was a 12-man reconnaissance team being sent out to the promised land to check things out. When I saw there were 7 questions, I got interested, and I began to study it a lot more deeply. And I basically was looking for the implication and then the application. And I came up with what you see here before you. Now, before I show you how that worked and how that came about, let me tell you the story. So I had just gotten this thing down and I'd figured it out on paper, and I spent 2 or 3 days on my knees and, sitting in a chair at my desk, praying and asking God to show me the meaning of those 3 or 4 verses. Well, as it happened, I was going by a client that I had, and I was visiting him, and it was an air conditioning distributor, meaning they distributed brand X to the various air conditioning companies, heat and air companies. Like if it was Louisville, it would be Louisville Heat and Air, or Nashville Heat and Air, or Sarasota Heat and Air, whatever it would be. And those are the kind of companies they would call on, who are the kind of companies that come to your house and fix your air conditioning problems. Okay, so that's who their customers were. They were the distributor supplying a particular brand to their marketplace. And they had the rights for all of Tennessee, I believe, part of Kentucky and Alabama, if I'm remembering it correctly. Anyway, good sized company. And he said to me when I stopped by, he said, Michael, I'm going to be going to this big air conditioning company, this big dealer in town. He said, but we don't have any business with him. I've called on him twice a month with my VP of sales, twice a month for 6 years. He said, I've gone to breakfast, lunch, and dinner with him and his crew. I brought the meals. I've been over to his house for dinner. He's been over to my house for dinner. Our families have gone to movies together, but in 6 years, I haven't got a nickel's worth of business. What would you do? I said, well, if it was me, and I just discovered these 7 questions. I said, I had 7 questions I'd want to ask him. He looked at me rather puzzled. Like, what are you talking about? And I said, and I didn't tell him where I got it from, not at that point. And I said, well, what I'm talking about is really 7 topics. And that's where I would explore. He said, well, can you write them out for me? I'm going there tomorrow, I think it was. He was going there on Wednesday. I said, sure. So I wrote out this sheet that you're looking at right here. And I had questions on both sides. I had questions on the back of it. I had a lot of questions. The idea was that they'd be a menu. It wasn't the idea that he asked every question, but it was sort of a choice of questions that he could ask, going to the categories that you see on the screen behind me. And so that was the gist of what I put together for him. Well, he went out and did something different than he'd ever done before. Instead of talking about the ball game and family and kids and picnics and whatever they like to talk about all the time, he talked about the questions that were on that sheet. What it did was it opened up opportunities that he had never seen before, that the prospect had never thought of before. The net result was this: 48 hours later, Friday, he received a purchase order for $60,000. He was stunned, floored, blown away. And he called me and said, I need you to get in front of my sales team on Monday, whatever day it was. And he called an emergency sales meeting, and he put me in front of his entire team, which is about 18 guys, if I remember right. And he said, he held up this piece of paper. He said, I don't know what it is, and I don't know why it works, but I want every one of you using it. Now, Michael's going to show you how to do it. And so, I trained them for the day, and this was the end of March. Now, this is important because it's a bit of a seasonal business, air conditioning, as you can imagine. And it was the end of March. It was in Tennessee. And so the previous April, they'd done 1.2 million in sales. Their plan was this April to do 1.3. They're trying to get a $100,000 bump if they could. And so I trained them all at the end of March, and away they went in April. The thing that made it work, I believe, was that the president made it mandatory. You have got to ask these questions. You want your job here, you got to do it the way I did it and got that order. And so he made them do that. They went out, and at the end of April, I came back and said, okay, how did it go? And I'm telling you, without exaggeration, I can still remember the look on his face. The color had drained from his face. It was the end of the month. He had just found out what his sales were for the month. He knew exactly where they were. And instead of doing 1.2 like last year or 1.3 like they were hoping, they'd done 1.7 and a half. He was speechless. And he said, where did you get this from? So I decided to tell him. I said, I learned it from Moses. He'd have been less surprised if I just cold cocked him, I think, but anyways, I explained a little later, I guess, but I know he thought it was very strange, but that was basically the proof of concept. It not only worked for him to snag a $60,000 order after 6 years of trying to get business and getting none, but it worked for the entire sales team, immediately getting about a 45% increase in sales the very next month. So that's my proof of concept story. I hope it helps you. We'll see you in the next video.